When I was in high school, I was an active runner. I would run every day after school, which allowed me to clear my head or just get some clarity on things I had to decide. I had run track on and off since middle school, so I could keep up a good pace while running distance and even run a pretty decent mile. The story takes place around the time I was a senior in high school, so there was a lot on my mind. Things like which college I was going to attend or which colleges I could even get into. Everything was changing pretty fast, and the amount of stress I had from school had finally gotten to me. So I decided that I would go running in a park after school one day just to give myself some time to think. The park was a pretty popular place, and it had some really great trails, and it helped that it wasn't far from my house, so I had ran there pretty often. I always felt safe while running in the park, as I saw lots of people I knew and would always see somebody else on the trails. There were some undeveloped areas that you could run in for some good scenic views where you could sometimes see deer and other animals. When I had gotten to the park, there were people there, but it wasn't as busy as usual, which didn't bother me as I had a lot on my mind and needed some time to run and just think. I did all the things I usually did, like stretch and got ready to enter the woods. I put my headphones in, and the second I did, I blurred everything else out. I had started my run with a nice light jog and passed some people and smiled like normal, until there was a man who greeted me with a smile that was extremely unsettling. If I had to describe it, I would say imagine somebody is looking down and they smile with no teeth while bringing their eyes up. It was creepy, but I nodded and waved like I normally would. I tried not to pay too much attention to the man, and I kept running as I was at a public park and it wasn't unusual to see people. I had maybe run a few laps around the common park area and kept passing the man in the same area, which struck me as weird as I had run laps that took 5 to 8 minutes. Every time I would pass, I would politely nod and keep running. After a while though, I started to think more about the situation. I began wondering why the man hadn't moved much from the original area I saw him in. At this point, I started seeing less people on the main trails as it became later in the afternoon. The sun was covered in the clouds, and although it hadn't set, it was getting darker and gloomy as if a storm were coming. It was late April, so it was hot and rainy, and I decided that I would run a little bit longer until it started to rain. Then I would head back to my car. I ran past the main parking lot and noticed that my car was the only car parked in the lot, so I knew that I was alone, and I figured everyone knew the rain was coming and had decided to leave. I ran towards the entrance and re-entered the running paths, passing the original place where I had seen the man, and he was gone. I slowed down, catching my breath, and walked slightly for a few minutes deeper on the trail. I was gathering my thoughts when I felt the feeling of being watched. I took my headphones out, and when I did, the park was silent, scary silent. You couldn't hear the trees blowing in the wind or cars from the main road. You could only hear my breath and the music blasting from my headphones. I looked around and didn't notice anything, so I kept walking, this time remaining vigilant as I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I was walking, I had my head down, and when I brought it up, I noticed the man from earlier walking in my direction, except this time he wasn't smiling. He looked agitated, and I didn't even bother to smile or wave. I kept my head down, but noticed he was in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeve shirt, something I hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't unusual for somebody to be wearing that, but it was in the low 80s and humid from rain days prior, so I knew he had to be hot. I kept walking for a minute, hoping that I was in the clear, and when I made it probably 20 feet away, I turned around to see where he had gone, and to my surprise, he also turned around. He was walking in my direction now. I picked up my pace a little and started jogging, leaving my headphones out this time. Every step I took, I heard more behind me. I glanced back and noticed the man jogging as well. I was so deep into the trail though that I was equidistant to both the start and finish, and if I kept going, I would loop around to my car without having to turn around. I had close to a mile left on the trail, but every time I would pick up the pace, so would the man. I kept hoping that he would stop to take a breath, but he never did. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, especially since every time I picked up the pace, he was quick to do the same as well. The area was much darker now, and the rain had started pouring. I was now drenched, and I looked back, and the man was even closer than before. He was gaining on me, and I knew that I had to make a fast decision, so I went for it in hopes that if he was following me, he wouldn't calculate my next move. I was approaching a scenic dip off the trail that had been overgrown and covered by leaves and sticks leaning downward on a slope like a tall hill. People had stopped running down it because of how steep it was, but it cut right down the main loop and led right to the parking lot kind of. At this point, the only people who really knew about it were the people who had run before it became overgrown. I picked up my pace as fast as I could and went straight for the main path. I went for it and covered my face with my arms, cutting a sharp left running through the twigs, vines, and leaves. I heard an audible gasp followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, hoping that I had made the right decision and too afraid to look back until I reached the bottom of the hill. I had put a good distance between us, and when I turned around and looked for the last time, he was standing at the top of the hill looking down at me. He looked annoyed and angry, like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. He was breathing heavily and covered in rain, just staring at me with such anger. I didn't stick around, and I ran as fast as I could towards my car, and I quickly jumped into it, pulling out of the parking lot as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, noticing the man at the edge of the woods staring, and it immediately sent chills down my spine, as there were no other cars in the parking lot. I was shaking the whole drive home, and was too afraid to tell my parents, because if they knew about it they wouldn't let me run again, and that was my only form of solitude. I laid in bed all night in fear, thinking about his unsettling smile and how creepy he was. I finally fell asleep after replaying scenarios of what could have happened in my head. I was awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning by my stepdad, who had just gotten home from work. I heard him enter the house in a panic, screaming for me, and I sat up. He came to my room asking if I was okay, and I asked why he pointed outside. I quickly went outside to see my car door opened and my car had been gone through, seats slashed, and a busted back window. I was confused, as nothing had been stolen, but just to destroy my car was strange. I started thinking about who would do something like that or why. We lived in a secluded area with only 2 neighbors who lived far enough from us to have not heard anything. Aside from the glass and cut seats, the only thing sitting on my seat was my registration. It suddenly dawned on me that when I had run to my car earlier that day, I jumped straight in and took off. I didn't unlock my car. It was older, so it had to be manually locked and unlocked with a key, but I didn't unlock it. I knew it had to be the man from earlier. He must have gone through my car, which I probably accidentally left unlocked at the park, and he must have seen my registration and gotten my name and address from it. I moved to college shortly after, and my family sold the house when I was in college, but it still makes me wonder what else he would have done knowing where I lived. When I was in my early 20s, I used to jog through a massive cemetery when I came home from college to visit my mom. I loved jogging through there because it was so quiet and peaceful aside from the sounds of nature. One very late afternoon at dusk, I was jogging through the main part of the cemetery. I started to move along a small service road deeper in the cemetery. The road is about half a mile long and connects to another cemetery in an adjacent town. There are roughly 100 yards of uncut grassland and weeds on both sides of the little road that lead to dense forest. As I approached the midpoint of the service road during my jog, I noticed a teenage girl, if I had to guess in the range of 15 to 17 years old, sitting on a massive dead log. The dead log was stripped of bark, and it must have been somehow dragged out close to the road after falling in the woods. She was distinctly wearing 70s clothes, I think. I'm not certain on what the fashion trends were for what decades, but she was wearing massive bell-bottoms and a scruffy white blouse. She had greasy, sandy blonde hair, parted in the middle, and leather sandals on. She did not face me as I approached, and just kept her head facing the dark woods across the other side of the road. But I know she must have heard me hitting the pavement as I approached. So now we were the only people in this old little service road, with no one in front or behind as I passed between the 2 cemeteries. As I approached her and crossed her line of sight, she quickly shifted her eyes towards me as I said hi. I was shocked by the weirdness of her face, with larger than normal eyes, a tiny nose, thin small mouth, and whiteness of her skin. Her eyes, they were bluish white, like Siberian husky eyes, with massive dark rings around the irises. She said nothing back and just stared at me, expressionless, as I stumbled past. I say stumbled because I immediately felt this force hit me when we locked eyes, which made everything super detailed and surreal. I could no longer hear my own shoes hitting the pavement anymore. For those endless seconds, it was just deafness. No sounds, not even the crickets. Time seemed to slow down as if I were jogging in slow motion. Disoriented as I was, I continued along the road, past her, towards the other cemetery for about 5 to 7 seconds before my curiosity got the best of me. I turned around to jog back, but she was completely gone. Nothing there, just this huge dead log. I checked all around it, nothing. I know the area quite well, and there was absolutely no way she could have left my line of sight unless she sprinted the 100 yards to the woods in less than 7 seconds, which was impossible, especially in her clothes. I scanned the tree line but saw nothing, just darkening woods as the sun fell below the tree line, but I did have a feeling I was being watched. Again, no sound of crickets. Hairs on my neck and arms stood up despite heavy sweating from the run. I think I did my fastest mile of the run out there all the way home before the sun completely dropped. It gives me chills every time I think back to that face and those piercing eyes. Suffice to say, I never felt the urge to jog through there again. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 17 at the time, and I was in a phase of being a teen boy where I felt like I needed to work out all the time non-stop. I would work out every day and feel great about it. It was fun, and I started to make a lot of progress. Every day I had set a schedule of things I had to do for my workout plan, and one of these things included running. Every night after it got dark, I would go for a long run around my neighborhood. I hated how I looked, so I always did it at night and would usually run on the side of the neighborhood where no cars and no people ever were. One night, I was on my normal run at around 11:30 p.m. It was the first night I thought of going on a weighted run because I saw a video about it and wanted to try it. I didn't have any weighted gear, so I took one of the plates from my home gym and put it into my backpack. I went out for a run around my neighborhood to the dark, secluded area on the side. I never thought of it as a creepy place. It always made me feel safe in a way. Anyways, it had a dirt road going alongside the big neighborhood and had a canal on the other side of the dirt road. Across the canal were the fences of the people in the neighborhood. Next to the fences across the canal and next to the dirt road were trees and shrubs, so it felt fairly secluded for being a neighborhood. These runs weren't really running, more jogging with stops in between to catch my breath and water breaks. As I was jogging, it felt like a normal night, but about halfway through my jog, I was sure that I heard heavy breathing behind me, not close, but somewhere in the darkness behind me. I looked and didn't see anyone and blamed it on my imagination. I kept my run going and didn't stop for another 10 minutes. When I was about to stop, I heard it again, the same heavy breathing as before, and I turned around and saw nothing. I was getting a little freaked out at this point, but I didn't want to let whatever I thought was following me know that I heard it was there. At the end of my neighborhood, when I went around to the other side of the canal to run back towards the main road, I heard rocks kicking and heavy breathing again behind me. When I got to the other side of the canal across the little bridge, I looked back and saw a figure wearing all black. I stopped for a second and just stared at the spot, trying to see if the figure would move, or if I was still imagining something and just seeing a strange bush or tree. I heard a man's voice speak loudly and say, "Hey, I see you," coming from the direction I was looking. I threw my bag on the dirt and sprinted as fast as I could. As soon as I threw down my bag, I felt a wave of relief because I felt springy and just felt so much faster. I wanted to make it out with my weight and bag, but I'd rather be alive than die with my weight. I came back the next day with my brother and a couple of friends when it was bright outside to search for my backpack, and I found a note attached to it that said, "See you soon." Thinking about it now gives me the chills. Later that week, I heard from the news that a hitchhiker had been killed. A guy that was walking his dog in my city had also been killed the same week that I had my experience. I never saw that man again and never saw him on the news. I'm not sure if he got caught or not, but after that night, I made sure to never go running in the dark again. I was 14 years old when this happened. We just had an event at school, meaning we had a half day. Even though I was all dressed up in a nice dress and shoes and it was raining, I wanted to walk back home through the park that was between where I lived and my school. I wanted to walk home since my parents were at work, and I figured I would have to wait at school a while before they came to pick me up. I put on my raincoat and started walking towards the park. A couple of blocks away from the entrance, I stopped at a red light where a middle or old-age man was in jogging attire and a light raincoat. Now, I live in the city, and one thing about the city is you hardly ever make small talk with strangers, ever. But he was on the older side, so I didn't think it was weird when he started talking to me. Sometimes older people like to talk. It started out as small talk, but as we both started crossing the street, it started slowly getting stranger. He said to me, "What a pretty dress. Are you going to some sort of party?" I told him I was going to a friend's house and that I had just been to an event. He said, "Well, that dress really makes you look so mature." I didn't comment at all when he said that. He started talking more, still walking right next to me, saying that he had to get his jog in before the rain started and how he liked to run in the park. That would have been all good and dandy, but just a minute after he said that, he walked past where he needed to turn to go to the entrance of the park. This made no sense, and he would have to walk a full extra 8 blocks to enter the park now. He asked to walk me home the rest of the way. I said, "I'm good, thank you. Also, I think you just missed your turn into the park." He made a bit of a sour facial expression before almost immediately becoming all cheery again. He said, "Oh, it's fine. I can always go on a run somewhere different, especially if I get to talk with such a pretty young girl." He stepped a bit closer to the point that if a stranger saw us, they'd assume that we were family or something along those lines. That was the final straw. I immediately said, "This is my stop," before turning into a random fancy building and telling the doorman that a man outside had been acting weird and sort of following me. He told me I could wait inside the lobby. Apparently, the man didn't leave until 5 minutes later when the doorman asked who he was waiting for, and he said his daughter. The doorman then threatened to call 911 after some back and forth, which made the man eventually leave. I ended up calling an older friend who had a car to pick me up. This may have just been me freaking out, but I was sure that I saw the man waiting across the street in a cafe when I went outside to get into the car. It's a big city, so I haven't seen him since, but I'm sure he still goes out running in the area near the park. I was living 2 hours north of my hometown right after college, but came back down on the occasional weekend to stay with my family. It wasn't unusual for me to go jogging while I was visiting, and on this particular weekend, I had actually remembered to bring my running shoes, so I went off on a jog. Where I grew up is a small farming community, and everything is laid out in 1-mile square blocks, with some of them cut in half on occasion. I began running, and I went 1 mile and took a left turn. Then I ran a half-mile to where one of the occasional half-mile roads was, before turning around and starting home. Right as I reached the turnaround point, a car slowed down and a guy asked, "Are you okay in this rain?" I was startled and responded that yes, I was fine and thank you. They left and I could see them turn down the half-mile road. I was a bit unsettled because I hadn't known the guy and it was barely raining, not even worth being called a drizzle. Then imagine my surprise when I saw the same car come up behind me again. He kept going past me this time, but I saw him pull to the side and park just past the intersection next to a field. That's when I was officially scared. Fortunately, there's a large dairy farm on one of the corners, so I knew there were people around. My uncle's house is also close. My route had me turning right, where there are scattered houses, but I had been continuing straight past the car, so there were no houses on either side for half-mile, just fields. I made my turn and sprinted to my uncle's house and called my dad to come pick me up right away. I told him and my mom what happened, and they got worried because a lot of our neighbors ran that same route. In fact, my mom had just seen one of them start her run. She hopped back in the car to go stop my neighbor and explained what I had just experienced, and the neighbor asked her for a ride back. Meanwhile, I texted my other neighbor and let her know. The neighbor I texted happens to be former law enforcement. She quickly called me and asked what the car looked like, so I explained. It turns out that same car had stopped and talked to her 11-year-old daughter while she was out in the yard. She told me that she was going to call a friend and if I would be willing to talk to them. I agreed. It turns out the guy had just gotten out of jail. I don't know for what crime, but he was on parole and was not supposed to be hanging out in our area. I found out that he had also stopped another neighbor when she was jogging too, and she said the man kind of backed off when he saw her phone with her. I'm really glad I brought my phone that day with me on my run.